Welcome, everyone. We're excited. We're going to get started here in just one moment. At the top of the hour, lovely to see everyone. Nice to see all of the people joining. We'll get started at the top of the hour. Again, thank you for registering. We'll see you soon. All right. Thank you, everyone, for joining us today on this lovely May Thursday, our first Thursday in May. I'm excited to introduce you to Dr. Meredith Keeley. She's my esteemed colleague here at Mindplay, and she has been joined by a lovely representative from the education world as well, Amanda Calkins, a technology coordinator at Vail School District in Arizona. So without further ado, I'm going to turn the time over to Dr. Meredith Keeley to talk to us and teach us all things Orton-Gillingham and the science of reading.
Thank you, Michelle. Thank you for joining us. My name is Meredith Keeley. I'll give you a brief introduction about myself. I was a special education teacher for a good chunk of my career for about 20 years. After that, I taught at the local community college. I taught developmental reading, and I also taught some reading certification courses at NAU. I ended up at Mindplay because I did my PhD using Mindplay with community college students. That's my passion, is adult literacy. And then I made my way into director of curriculum here at Mindplay. And I will let Amanda introduce herself now.
Hi, everyone. My name is Amanda Calkins, and I started out as a second and third grade teacher in the Vail School District in Southern Arizona. During COVID, I moved over to become a technology coordinator to help those teachers learn how to do remote learning for the first time. And I am a literacy and an ed tech coach for my school district.
Thank you, Amanda. So our objectives today are to define the key components of the science of reading and talk about why it's important in today's educational landscape. We'll also provide an overview of the Orton-Gillingham method and how it fits within the broader framework of the science of reading and applies to today's educators in curriculum planning. We'll review strategies for effective technology use in the classroom and also how Mindplay will support teachers in providing evidence-based instruction in the classroom. So current challenges today include low reading proficiency rates that have been further worsened by periods of interrupted learning. The pandemic also intensified these existing educational disparities, highlighting the critical need for more personalized support and instruction. Unfortunately, many districts face a lack of equitable access to instruction that is grounded in the science of reading. So in response to these challenges, we are increasingly turning to research-based solutions, specifically the science of reading, to accelerate learning for all of our students. So most general reading programs and reading instruction in educational centers are not based on science. Until recently, many believed that reading was something that just occurred naturally, a skill that children would just develop. But many children aren't developing this skill. This gap in evidence-based education has significant consequences, and in fact, 25 million kids in the United States cannot read proficiently. So today's students learning to read. Learning to speak a first language is a natural process for students, but learning to read is not the same. Children enter the classroom with diverse reading abilities and different skill sets. So it's crucial that we provide individualized and specialized instruction to meet all of their needs. The good news is that our understanding of effective reading instruction has deepened significantly. We now know more about how children learn to read and what contributes to reading difficulties and how we can prevent these challenges. I'm going to now hand it over to Amanda, who will dive into the Scarborough's reading rope and the simple view of reading and how that ties into the science of reading.
Okay. So a lot of us have already heard about this new push for the science of reading, and we've been working towards it. Basically, the simple view of reading, it's a research-based framework that is used in the science of reading. And research has shown that reading is not a natural skill for our children, like the way they learn to talk. And studies have studied the brain and what it does in order for reading to occur. And they found that there are 7 areas in our brain that actually have to work together for a person to learn to read. And they include 4 main processing systems in our brain. The first one is the phonological processing system, and it uses several areas in the brain, and it enables us to remember, interpret, and produce the speech and sound systems of our language and other languages. Then we have the printed word recognition. It depends on fast, accurate orthographic mapping, which is the matching of letters and letter sequences with the sounds of spoken word. And this takes place in the back of our brain in the occipital lobe. And a good phonic system like Mindplay is what helps build those skills of both the phonological and the orthographic processing systems. The third processing system our brain needs involves our temporal lobes, and it's responsible for the language comprehension or the connecting of the spoken words and their meanings. And then we have the last processing system, which is the context processing system, and its job is to interact and provide support to the meaning processor. So looking at this simple view of reading, we know that reading comprehension depends on 2 main factors: word recognition and oral language comprehension. That multiplication sign in this equation reminds us that comprehension is the product of these 2 factors. So a deficit in either area seriously affects reading comprehension. You can kind of think of it like a recipe. If you're missing one of those ingredients, that whole dish is going to suffer. This simple view, it's a great starting point, but reading is actually more complex than this illustration demonstrates, because just knowing the letters and words isn't enough. If you can't understand what someone is saying, then you're not going to be able to understand what you're reading. And this highlights the importance of oral language skills within our reading comprehension. The simple view, it helps us see the essentials, but it's like a basic map. So to truly understand reading, we need a more detailed one. And this is where the reading rope comes in. It dives deeper, showing the many sub-skills needed for smooth, successful reading. So looking at Scarborough's reading rope, it was developed by Dr. Hollis Scarborough, and it breaks down reading comprehension into its essential components. So you can see how it's broken up into the main language comprehension and then the word recognition, just like in the simple view. But it also breaks it down into more essential components. So imagine this rope as a collection of intertwined strands, and each strand represents a crucial skill. And so by understanding these strands, we gain a deeper grasp of what it takes to become a successful reader. Dr. Scarborough, he used pipe cleaners to illustrate how the skills are interconnected yet distinct. And mastering each strand allows for a smooth, accurate reading that becomes increasingly automatic and strategic over time. So our human brain isn't naturally wired for reading. We don't instinctively understand that symbols represent sounds and meaning. And this is why explicit and systematic instruction by teachers in programs like Mindplay is key for our students. And by following scientific principles that's in the science of reading, we can teach our brains to recognize and understand letters, syllables, words, to help build a strong foundation for reading comprehension. This next slide, the next few slides actually illustrate why we need both areas to become strong readers. So if you look at this one, it shows a strong word recognition but a weak language comprehension. In this case, the reader may be able to read the words accurately, but they struggle to understand what that text actually means. And this is often seen in individuals with good decoding skills, but limited vocabulary or language comprehension abilities, very typical of our EL population who can learn to decode very quickly, but don't have that background knowledge in the language. The next slide shows a student with a weak word recognition, but a strong language comprehension. These readers may have weak decoding skills, but they may struggle to read it accurately, but they can kind of understand what's happening when it's read to them, or if they have learned to use some of those context clues to guess the words. This third illustration shows that we have a weak word recognition and a weak language comprehension. And individuals with weakness in both are likely to experience significant difficulties with reading comprehension. And then this last one, this one is the combination that leads to strong reading comprehension as the reader can accurately decode and comprehend the meaning of the text. And these illustrations really just highlight that a deficit in just one of those areas is going to severely weaken the reading comprehension of a reader. And a reader really needs both strong word recognition and language comprehension.
Okay, thank you, Amanda. So as you can see, the science of reading and Scarborough's reading rope, it's a complex system. So we need to help educators be able to implement all of these pieces into their classroom. So we're going to start with what the science of reading is not. Oftentimes we hear the word science of reading and people assume it's a phonics program or it's only about phonics, one element of the actual larger body of knowledge. It is not a phonics program. It is not a curriculum. It informs, it provides information on the most effective methods for teaching reading, including decoding and comprehension, but it does not prescribe a specific curriculum. And lastly, it cannot be adopted, audited, piloted, or purchased. So it's a comprehensive approach based on research that guides how we teach reading rather than a boxed product that can be implemented directly. So what is the science of reading? It is a body of research that encompasses various studies and findings from cognitive psychology, linguistics, neuroscience, and education that have contributed to our understanding of how reading develops and how it can be effectively taught to students. The term science of reading has been in use for several decades, but the foundational research that underpins this approach to reading instruction has been ongoing for much longer. The science of reading emphasizes several key instructional practices that have been proven to promote reading development successfully. And all of these practices are grounded in research and been shown to significantly enhance the learning process. One of the most influential aspects of the science of reading has been its role in reshaping literacy education, including the importance of systematic phonics instruction, which provides a structured approach to learning the relationships between letters and sounds, and the importance of early intervention for struggling readers, ensuring they receive the necessary support early on to prevent learning difficulties. So there are 5 components of effective instruction. I'm sure you have heard them all, heard the words before: phonemic awareness, phonics, fluency, comprehension, and vocabulary. So it's a holistic approach. In general, teachers who work with students with dyslexia and other reading challenges have been using these methods based on the science of reading for a long time. And now it's just more recently being recognized as effective instruction for all students. So we have seen that this approach works for all children learning to read, not just those who are struggling. And at Mindplay, Judith Bliss, who developed Mindplay, she made sure to focus on this research behind teaching students with dyslexia So actually, for a very long time, this program has been based on the science of reading using the Orton-Gillingham approach. And so in this presentation today, we'll briefly touch upon the components of all the components of reading instruction and a particular focus on phonics. So beginning with reading instruction, we start with phonemic awareness. And phonemic awareness is sets the foundation for phonics, really. It's how these sounds are represented. It's, helping students. Phonemic awareness is the ability to hear, identify, and manipulate individual sounds. And research has consistently shown that phonemic awareness is a strong predictor of future reading success. So children who developed really good phonemic awareness skills are generally better prepared to read fluently, spell accurately, and understand text. So instruction in phonemic awareness is particularly critical for preventing reading disabilities and assisting those who are struggling. So for example, children with dyslexia often have a core deficit in phonemic awareness, so explicit instruction in phonemic awareness is really important. So phonemic awareness is not only about reading, but it also contributes to spelling proficiency. So understanding the phonemic structure of words helps children spell them correctly. So as children become adept at manipulating phonemes, they can focus on comprehension and less on decoding each word. In addition, it supports vocabulary development. So as children become aware of more phonemes, they can segment and reassemble words more effectively, which aids in vocabulary acquisition. So we want to make sure that we're focusing a lot of our time with beginning readers on phonemic awareness. So phonological awareness, you'll see this is titled phonological awareness, and I was just talking about phonemic awareness. There are two terms that are often used interchangeably. However, phonemic awareness is the most complex skill under the broad umbrella term of phonological awareness. So phonemic awareness is a step in the phonological awareness sequence. So phonological awareness refers to the ability to recognize and manipulate sound structures of spoken language. So we teach this in steps, as you can see from the chart. We'll begin with rhyming and alliteration, sentence segmentation, syllables, onsets, and rhymes. And so the last one you can see is phonemic awareness. So phonemic awareness, as I said, is the most complex skill of phonological awareness. And that's when students will be isolating sounds, blending sounds, segmenting sounds, adding sounds, deleting sounds, all tasks that we have our little ones do in the classroom. And as you can see with the arrow on this triangle, they go from simpler to more complex. So effective phonological awareness instruction typically involves activities that are engaging, interacting, oftentimes game-like. And it's because these activities, they don't require print. So when you think about phonological awareness, you think about if there's a letter involved, it's phonics. If there's not, it's phonological awareness. And understanding the sound structures is really important for students to begin their phonics journey. So phonics, what we hear the most when we're talking about the science of reading, there's lots of reasons it's really important. Mainly, it teaches the relationship between phonemes, the sounds of spoken language, and graphemes, the letters and spellings that represent those sounds in written language. So this understanding is crucial for decoding, which is the ability to recognize and read words by sounding them out. And then effective decoding is foundational for fluent reading. Once a student masters phonics, they can read words more quickly and accurately. So this fluency frees up cognitive resources, allowing students to focus on the meaning of the text rather than just on decoding each word. So fluent readers can better enjoy and engage with text because they're not so worried about trying to figure out what each word says, and able to focus on reading fluently and understanding text, which leads us to the next one, which is reading comprehension. So again, when you're not focusing on decoding, you're able to concentrate on what you're reading and understand what you're reading. So for students who struggle with reading, explicit phonics instruction is particularly beneficial. As we've talked about, research shows that systematic phonics instruction is effective for all learners, but especially critical for those students who are at risk for dyslexia. So without understanding the relationship between letters and sounds, the process of reading can't occur. And that's why phonics is so important. We really need to help students understand that letters represent sounds and to be able to decode these words during reading and encode during writing. So the Orton-Gillingham method is used quite frequently when we're talking about phonics instruction and aligns with the science of reading. The Orton-Gillingham method was among one of the first teaching methods designed to help struggling readers by explicitly teaching the connections between letters and sounds. So it's a structured literacy approach backed by science. And it's a prescriptive way to teach literacy when reading, writing, and spelling does not come easily to individuals. So, but as we said, what we've realized more recently is it's actually a great method for all students. It really emphasizes the importance of teaching strategies sequentially, starting with the more common and predictable sound symbol connections in English before moving on to more advanced and predictable concepts. So why is the Orton-Gillingham method effective? First off, it emphasizes the use of multiple senses to help strengthen learning. So using visual, auditory, tactile pathways all at the same time while you're trying to teach a skill builds stronger connections in the brain. So it makes learning more memorable and accessible for students who may struggle with the traditional reading methods. It's systematic and structured. So the method follows a specific sequence and builds on previously learned material. This systematic approach ensures that students learn new concepts while retaining the concepts they learned previously. The instruction is phonics-based, and it's individual and diagnostic. So what that means is each lesson is tailored to the student's individual needs. So instructors assess students continually to understand their strengths and weaknesses, and then they adapt the pace and content of the lessons accordingly. So progress monitoring and constantly making sure that students have retained the knowledge they've learned previously is really important in this method. The content is also cumulative, so the material is introduced in a way where the one concept builds on another. So again, this helps reinforce previous learning and aids in the retention of information over time. We want to make sure that we're not moving students on before they mastered the skills they need to be successful. It also employs direct instruction. So there's constant feedback. Teachers need to work with students, model for students, and make sure they're paying attention to errors students are making so that they can correct them in the moment. That's how students are going to retain and remember how to do things correctly before moving on. So it emphasizes understanding over rote memorization. So this is pretty important because I think it goes back to talking about, we just think students learn how to read, like they just know because they just memorize it or they know it. So while repetition is a component of the method, there's a strong emphasis on understanding the why behind the rules of the language. So as students learn the rules, they're able to apply them to new, longer words that they're learning. And I think, little side story, you know, when I took my first reading certification class, I had no idea that certain groups of letters made certain sounds. I was one of those people who just learned how to read. So understanding rules is really important in decoding, but some people don't know that there are rules, me being one of them. And now we have learned that teaching students these rules helps them be successful as they move forward in their learning. So continuous feedback and positive reinforcement. Again, we want to make sure that students are receiving that feedback in the moment. It motivates them, it builds confidence, and correcting those errors in real time facilitates more effective learning. And one of the things that's important here, I think that distinguishes Mindplay, is that we don't just say, yes, you're right, or no, you're wrong, try again. We give that immediate feedback with specific pinpointed errors, so students can see specifically in a word where they've made an error and what that error might be. So the Orton-Gillingham method, the way this approach works is the first step is assessing students. So whether you're working with a large group or a smaller group, you want to assess students for their skills. And obviously that'll be different depending on the grade level you're working with. Once you've assessed students and where they're at, you can group them and teach them in small groups with others at that same level. So as we talked about in the science of reading, it's skill-focused instruction. So an example of skills-focused instruction would be beginning a lesson, reviewing previous concepts. So you always want to review what you learned in the lesson before you introduce the new concept. That repetition helps with the mastery of previously learned skills. So introducing the new concept is the I do, we do, you do strategy, which is pretty common. You're going to explain the rule, the phonics rule that you're working on. You'll discuss the rule, all the parts of it that are important, and demonstrate the rule. And once you've given that instruction, you're going to provide students with multi-sensory activities to practice. So that guided practice is when you're interacting with students and helping them figure out how to follow the rule correctly, depending on what you're teaching. And then they're going to have independent practice. So students will work on an activity on their own, and you can still help them out, help them figure out what they need to do to make corrections or give them positive reinforcement if they're doing great. And then once that's all done, you're going to reassess. So you're going to do a quick assessment and review. It's not a huge, big test, just it can be fun, it can be a game, it can be whatever you need to be able to figure out if they understand the concept. And then if they don't, revisiting those troublesome spots, looking for patterns of where they're making errors. So that's the general sequence of how a phonics lesson would work. You would also want to provide continued practice of new skills and subsequent lessons. So it's really important not just to teach one skill and then be done, like constantly bringing in the previous skills to make sure students are retaining them so that they can incorporate those lessons into future lessons that are building on those skills. It's also important to incorporate reading passages that reinforce fluency with the pattern that was introduced. So that could be in the form of decodable books, which are good to practice fluency, and just giving students a chance to apply the skills they've learned in real text. And another interesting thing about Mindplay Phonics is it was developed based on the Orton-Gillingham method. And it does incorporate these strategies using a virtual speech and language pathologist who provides explicit instruction, one skill at a time, and provides that corrective feedback. And the students are also continuously progress monitored. So if they master a skill, but the adaptive program recognizes that they're making an error on a previously learned skill, that lesson will be reassigned, but it'll be reassigned using a different type of instruction. So they won't just be hearing the same lesson over and over again, which aligns with this Orton-Gillingham approach. So as students learn to decode, our goal is to help them build reading fluency. We want students to become efficient readers. We want them to be able to read text quickly and accurately with proper expression. So this is going to give students less cognitive strain the more fluently they can read. As I've mentioned before, when students aren't laboring to decode each word, they can dedicate more of that mental energy to comprehending what they read, which is the ultimate goal of reading. So teaching fluency also increases reading stamina and motivation. So as students become more fluent, they are likely to find reading less taxing and more enjoyable. They're understanding what they're reading and gaining knowledge from the information. They're going to be more likely to want to read. And that is what we want at the end of the day. So it also sets the stage for the development of higher level reading skills, such as analytic thinking and critical interpretation of text. So students are going to need to be able to read fluently, to comprehend and engage with complex texts, and participate in advanced literary analysis, which are key components of education as we move forward. So fluency is a bridge between decoding words and understanding them. Although we want them to read with speed and accuracy, we want them to read correctly. So accuracy over speed, but the ultimate goal is to be able to have them do both at the same time. It involves the automaticity in word recognition, comprehension, and prosody. So once we're reading fluently, the goal is to be able to comprehend the text we read, which brings us to why comprehension is important. So comprehension is essential for academic success across all subjects. Whether students are reading textbooks, scientific articles, or just a story in English class, they need to be able to read information, to learn new information, and solve problems, and engage critically with the material. So we want to foster thinking skills by encouraging students to ask questions, make connections, infer meaning, evaluate evidence, and draw conclusions. These are the higher order thinking skills that are essential for academic success and lifelong learning. So comprehension is also closely related to vocabulary knowledge. As students encounter new words in text, they expand their vocabulary, they deepen their understanding of word meanings and usage. So conversely, a strong vocabulary enhances comprehension by providing the background knowledge necessary to make sense of complex text. And again, engagement and motivation, which are really, really important. We want students to connect with what they've read. We want them to be engaged with what they're reading and feel motivated to continue to read. So we want to encourage active participation in reading, which will lead to a positive reading experience and a love of learning. And real-world application. So comprehension skills are not just limited to the classroom. They're essential for functioning in everyday life. Whether reading a newspaper article, following directions, we need strong comprehension skills to navigate the complexity of the modern world. So again, understanding that communication and understanding conversations you're having with other people, that communication is super important. So the main goal of reading, obviously, is to understand what you're reading, and having strong decoding skills, reading fluently, and having a good vocabulary lay the foundation for comprehension. Fluency and comprehension at Mindplay is used, are work together in one component. So students will read a fluency passage and the comprehension is attached to that. We also have a personalized library with embedded comprehension questions that really give teachers an idea of how students are doing, understanding what they're reading. And then lastly, we have vocabulary. So vocabulary, obviously, as I just said, is strongly linked to reading comprehension. So when students encounter unfamiliar words while they're reading, we want them to be able to understand the text without having to worry so much about the vocabulary. So we do want to be teaching vocabulary because it enables them to comprehend text effectively, provides them with the tools to decipher unfamiliar words and infer meaning from context. So a rich vocabulary is essential for success across all subjects. And it fosters critical, It fosters critical thinking skills. Again, the more robust our vocabulary is, the more we help readers make sense of text. They can access new information and communicate effectively. So there are 3 tiers of vocabulary that are talked about. And the first one is tier 1. And tier 1 words are the most basic and common words in the English language. So they're typically words that you just learn naturally through everyday conversation. So for example, book, girl, sad. Many students are just going to know what those words mean because they hear them throughout the day. These words do not usually require explicit instruction because they're already part of their speaking and listening vocabularies. So tier 2 words are high frequency words that are used across a variety of subjects. So they're crucial for school success because they appear in academic texts, but they're less common in everyday spoken English. So those would be words that we often see in state testing: analyze, establish, verify. Those would be considered tier 2 words. They're taught directly through explicit instruction, and activities should require students to recognize and use the words in context. So they might be highlighted during reading discussions or writing sessions and should be reinforced across all subjects. And tier 3 words are subject-specific words. So these are words that are used within a specific discipline or field. So they're important for understanding content in academic subjects and are often best learned when they are taught during those content lessons. And because these words are not used frequently outside of that context, they do require explicit instruction. So for example, an example of that would be like in history or in math. You're learning something specific to history and math. You need to teach that vocabulary explicitly to students. So one effective way of teaching vocabulary is by the use of technology and media, multimedia. So digital tools can be helpful in catering to students' personal interests while learning vocabulary. It can be helpful if you assign a book that is a digital book and has the vocabulary targeted within that book. So for example, Mindplay's personal library includes vocabulary practice within the book. So if you were going to assign a lesson in a subject area, students would be able to be able to listen to target words. They can watch short video clips to gain a deeper understanding of the word. There's spider webs that pop up with synonyms and antonyms. So students can engage in these activities while they're reading the content. And that's really what we want. We want students to be learning the vocabulary in the context of where they would use that vocabulary. So access to a personalized library provides students with this opportunity. So whether you're using it as a content area or using it in a book of their interest, either way, that is most likely going to improve their motivation and retention. So now that we've addressed all 5 pillars of the science of reading, you can see how intricately they relate to one another. But we also want to be sure that our students are engaged in the learning process. So in this next section, we're going to focus on effective reading strategies that are supported by the science of reading research. In addition to that, we want to make sure that there is educational equity for all students. So Mindplay does apply the science of reading into practical classroom instruction that ensures all students receive the support and resources they need to accelerate learning. The instruction is explicit, systematic, cumulative, diagnostic, and responsive, and works to develop deep levels of comprehension for all learners. It has been proven effective at scale and diverse school settings and does meet the rigorous eligibility and accountability standards for ESSA. So by creating engaging learning environments that empower students to take ownership of their learning, we can lay the foundation for lifelong success and fulfillment. So science and research does also include key instructional strategies. I don't know that that's talked about as much as being a part of the science of reading as the 5 pillars of instruction. However, it does provide research-based content on how instruction should look to be effective. So explicit and systematic, we touched upon that in the phonics instruction. We want there to be a planned sequence that provides clear, direct explanations of each concept. And we want to ensure that the skills and concepts are taught step by step, with a focus on building that solid foundation before moving on to the next step. So differentiated, individualized, and personalized, I feel like are often used really interchangeably, but they are actually different. When we're talking about differentiated content, we're talking about instruction that is tailored to meet the learning needs, preferences, and goals of students. So it's content-based. So we want to know what our students' varied learning styles are. We want to be able to provide them instruction that is delivered in a way that is going to be effective for them. So differentiated is content related. Individualized pertains to pace. So if content is individualized, students are progressing through the curriculum at different speeds based on their own learning needs. So this can serve students who need to review material, or students who don't want to waste time covering information they've already mastered. And it also can help students who are more advanced and they are ready to move on because they're learning the content quicker. So individualized instruction is going to refer to how quickly students are learning or how much time they need to review a skill. And then personalized learning is preference. So this involves the student in the creation of learning activities, and it relies heavily on students' personal interest and curiosity. So this is really important for student engagement because these students have truly learned how to learn. They're choosing maybe the topic of a text that they're going to read, or just giving them control and ownership of their learning, giving them choices in what they're going to read based on preference. So differentiated, individualized, and personalized all work together. In Mindplay, we do have individualized instruction because students are pre and post tested. So students only receive instruction on the skills that they need. So for example, I've mastered the sound of letter T, but I haven't mastered the sound of P. The pre-assessment is going to acknowledge that you know one and not the other, and only assign instruction on skills that you need. And then in addition, there is clear explanations and modeling. So the instruction is provided with visuals on the screen, giving that multisensory approach. And the coach also models instruction before students are expected to practice. So students have multiple opportunities to practice the skill. And as I mentioned before, they receive that immediate corrective feedback. So that mastery is also very important. Again, if students progress through the curriculum and the adaptive technology recognizes they haven't mastered a skill, they're going to get that reassigned. So all of these components align with the effective reading strategies outlined by the science of reading. So how do we maximize learning outcomes in the classroom? So given all of this information, obviously your classroom is going to be full of varying levels So how do we make sure all students are receiving the instruction that they need? And one of the best ways to do that is to group students. So there's a few different ways we can group students. The first, which I think is most common, is skill-based grouping. So you're using assessment to determine specific strengths and weaknesses in all the areas: phonics, and awareness, vocabulary, fluency, and comprehension. It's not just limited to phonics. And then you're grouping those students based on similar needs. Flexible grouping is similar to skill-based grouping, but it's allowing students to move fluently through the group. So maybe this week I'm struggling with this concept, next week I'm not. These students can move in and out of groups depending on the concept they're learning, depending on how well they're retaining the information. Then we also have groups that foster personalization empowerment. So mixed grouping is also, I feel like, pretty common, where we're combining students of varying skill levels. And this is going to promote peer learning and peer mentorship. More advanced readers can model fluent reading and comprehension strategies. It becomes a collaborative learning environment. And then there's also interest-based grouping, which is going to be occasionally grouping students by their interest to engage them in reading. So this method can be used to enhance vocabulary and comprehension. It also increases motivation and engagement because students are interested in what they're learning about. With the personalized library, this can work really well because books with similar content can be found at varying reading levels. So you can combine students by interest and have them reading a book with content at their reading level. So ways to implement these groups: I think it's pretty common to do reading centers. One suggestion that we always have is to have one center be reading coach, which is our coach that gives individualized instruction. And we also have the personalized library, which again provides reading materials at a student's lexile level. So there's two places in Mindplay where students can get content at their appropriate level, and that can all be done independently on the computer. Another option would be to have a group where students are working on a writing assignment. And as well, there's teacher-led intervention. So teacher-led intervention would be working with those students who are really struggling on a skill, like we talked about in the previous slide. And then standards-based practice. So having a center where students are working on a standard that they need to be working on in a group, in a small group setting. So one way, implementing groups, again, can be a lot of work for teachers to create these groups, figure out exactly where students are and what they need to be working on. And so incorporating technology is a really easy way to get that information. I've attached here an intervention report from Mindplay that shows you how students are automatically grouped. So on the top portion of the report, you can see it's grayed out, but a list of students would be under group 1. And they're all, these are students who are spending a lengthy amount of time on a skill. So you know they're struggling with it. And you can group those students by that skill. And then there's a support sheet, which is a teacher-directed supplemental sheet where the teacher can work with the students. So in terms of those teacher-led interventions, the teacher can already knows what it is the student is struggling with, and then has a resource to provide additional instruction and maybe give even more feedback that's necessary to help students master the skills. You can also see below that students are grouped by the actual lesson they're on. So even if they're not necessarily struggling, you can see where students are within the program, which is going to help you group students and be able to give them effective instruction without having to go through and assess them individually all the time. It's a really quick, great way to help form reading centers. So on that note, in terms of assessing students, Mindplay has signals, which is a group of assessments. One of them is a dyslexia screening, which is typically for grades K through 2, depending on the state. As we know, there have been a lot of federal mandates for states to give dyslexia screening to all students. I've seen K1, some are K2, and some are K3, but the goal is the same. We want to identify students who are showing signs of being at risk for dyslexia. And then we want to provide those students with intervention. The whole point of dyslexia screening is to give targeted intervention. Oftentimes you'll find that those students do make progress, and then they're going to get caught up and move along with their peers. The ones that aren't making progress and you sort of tried everything, those are ones you'd want to move forward with talking to psychologists and specialists at your school. So the dyslexia screener at Mindplay has been normed and has been shown to align with the KTEA in terms of identifying students who are at risk. We also have benchmark testing, which is really administered at set points during the academic year. So we want to see what students are covering, how students are retaining information they've covered over a longer period of time. And this is really good to communicate with families and administrators. That's good for accountability. And we also have progress monitoring, which is great to determine progress and drive intervention. So that's going to be done at shorter intervals because we don't want to wait too long to progress monitor, because we want to make sure we're identifying those areas students are struggling in before we move on. And it gives us information to be able to reteach and differentiate instruction if we need to. So how Mindplay supports teachers is we like to say it's kind of a classroom of one. So all students can get exactly what they need because the content is adaptive and individualized. We can meet each student's needs, even though they're in a large group. And then alerting teachers when students are struggling. We can support teachers in identifying those students that need extra support. So when should a student's knowledge journey begin? Obviously, as research has shown us, we need to begin in kindergarten. We need to teach students that they must begin reading to learn as they're learning to read. So we often say by 3rd grade, we want students reading to learn, not learning to read anymore. So we need to start that journey early. And with high quality materials at the center of your language arts block, you're taking the first step towards a comprehensive approach. So a little summary: by providing comprehensive resources and tools aligned with the science of reading principles, we are able to include adaptive instruction, personalized learning paths. We can really get the core principles of the science of reading to transform literacy instruction in the classroom. So now I'm going to pass the floor to Amanda again, who will draw upon her firsthand experience to explore ways we can assist teachers in integrating technology effectively in the classroom.
Okay. So our last leg of information here. So if you need to stand and wiggle while I talk through this last part real quick, feel free to. So using new technologies, tools, apps, they can be very daunting for teachers. Supporting teachers when they are implementing these new tools is important because it helps ensure that that technology like Mindplay is going to be used effectively, and it's going to enhance the student learning outcomes, and it's going to help our teachers feel more confident in the integration of that new technology, as well as when they're helping their students use those tools. We're going to review some ways you can support your teachers. The first one is really just creating an integration plan and setting those clear goals and expectations with timelines. That's the first thing you should do. It not only supports your teachers, but it supports the overall mission of that integration of technology with purpose. You are going to want to include your teachers in that planning process to help create that teacher buy-in. Also identify and utilize those teachers who you know can help push that needle with the other teachers. Who is going to know about technology integration? Who are the teacher leaders on your campus? Those are the ones you're going to want to push a new program out successfully to first. The biggest takeaway, though, is to ensure that whatever technology app or tool you have decided to implement, that it meets the needs of the educational standards, and it is going to improve those student learning outcomes. For example, at my site, I can say with confidence that the use of our study island helps build skills with standards-based practice that is utilizing that same interactive features seen in state assessments. And I also know that when my students are using Mindplay, that they are receiving that phonics instruction that is going to build their phonological and orthographic processes to meet those foundational standards that are required for them to learn. The next section is a few of the ways you can support with professional development. It should be specific to the technology you're implementing along with the instructional goals. We never want to just focus on the technology, but we want to focus on the why we are using it and how it's going to be used best for students. It's also best to provide teachers with a hands-on approach. So they not only have their computers with them and they're following along with this new program, but they should also be able to see what the students view as well. Consider ongoing support with a whole group, a grade level, subject content, one-on-one coaching sessions. At my site, my teachers can schedule a day, a time, and a topic with me, and then I can provide them that individualized or grade level support with technology. Encourage them to collaborate, share their ideas, share their resources. You can also encourage them to work in teams to develop technology integrated lesson plans. In my district, I helped create an ed tech coaching program in my district so teachers can work directly with a coach to improve the lessons that they have been using for years by integrating technology with purpose into the core subjects. Technology does not and should not be an add-on or a substitute. It has to be used with purpose. And then I think the last section here is we are facilitating access to resources. And that simply means that you're making sure that the teachers and students have the tools they need to be successful in this implementation process and that they know where they can find help. Help could be in the form of teachers who may have piloted the program, a dedicated technology coordinator or other educator, or simply a teacher who loves to help. It will be also important to remember that companies like Mindplay do have a help desk. So making sure that your teachers or your technology coordinators know where that contact information is located. And then support our teachers by helping them evaluate the impact of a program on student learning and then gathering feedback. Assessment should be a continual effort, but it does not need to take a whole lot of time. It can be as simple as asking questions during a staff meeting or sending out a Google form to collect their thoughts, their needs, and other feedback regarding the impact. The one thing I do want to stress to keep in mind is don't just have a rating system from like 1 to 5 on how the program is working for students or how easy it is for them to use. Always follow that up with why isn't it working? Sometimes teachers are resistant to change and will speak negatively about any new technology implemented system or program. But if we can reach those teachers by asking more direct questions, then we have a better opportunity to find the root of any issues or struggles they may be having and then fix it before they become frustrated or to give up. And that's all I have.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
So I know we went over, Michelle, and you want to leave time for questions. So I'm going to go quick through this. Coming this fall, we have some decodable books in our personalized library, as well as oral reading fluency and retail coming to our assessment package.
Thank you to both Amanda and Dr. Meredith Keeley for sharing today. It was really informative. We want to keep some time for questions. I know we're at time, so if people have to hop off, feel free to put them in the question box. We can follow up with some resources as well, but we can answer some questions live. And then if you want to stay in touch with Mindplay, here are the social channels in which you can find us. And then if you want to speak to Dr. Meredith Keeley directly or have any insights or need resources, she has been so gracious to let us share her email address with you all so that we can continue to serve the students that you all work with. So without further ado, we'll move over to questions. Thank you, everyone. One of the questions that we heard, Meredith, was when we talk about intervention, are we referring specifically to tier 2 and 3, or are we also helping with remediation for tier 1 students?
Really, we were talking about all three because Mindplay is an adaptive program. So what your student needs is what your student's going to get. So it's really great for all students. And those students who maybe don't need intervention have ways to practice just fluency, increase their reading lexile. So for us, we're just looking at the student, not at their tier. So it's hard for me to, we're looking at the student as a whole, and they're going to get what they need no matter what tier that they're in. So, and that's the glory of the adaptive instruction. It's not the same for any one student. So I don't know if that really answered your question.
No,
yeah.
That's great. I think just understanding that Mindplay specifically can be used regardless of that tier, it is that just right, individualized, differentiated instruction. We can follow up with, best practices. We have an elementary interventionist wondering how they can use it both in intervention time in a classroom setting, but also, private tutoring offerings as well. So we do have a consumer-related product for those that are not in a school setting that we also have access on a one-to-one basis. Correct, Meredith?
Yes, that is correct.
Perfect. And then the last one is if we have the ability to either demonstrate the product or have you speak with a consultant, if you will, on what our product offers, which is yes. My wonderful colleague Tiana sent a message in the chat that said that you can follow the contact us form and we'd be happy to get you connected with someone. Am I missing any other questions? Again, thank you all for staying over. We've really enjoyed both of these individuals and helping us get smarter at understanding how to implement science of reading and Orton-Gillingham approaches in your schools.
Thank you for joining us.
All right, thank you.